Hello, fellow nerds. When it comes to model railroading, my favorite dive bar is somewhere between scratch building and kit bashing, and I usually kind of prefer the latter. There are so many good kits out there, and I really love the ones from long ago. Therefore, a question I ask a lot is, what's that kit? Welcome to Rust and HO Scale. My latest build is the Derrick Car produced by Ball Limited. Ball was founded in 1939 by M. Dale Newton, who sold the company to Howard Day in 1955. My guess is that this kit was likely developed under Day's supervision since it was released in 1964. I did a terrible job of filming the unboxing of this kit, just one miserable shot of the contents. Ball, though, is known for their white metal castings. This kit features a great deal of them. Side sills, end sills, bolsters, but what really makes this kit a prize is the Derrick Crane. It's mostly cast white metal, but includes 2 pieces of turned brass as well. Overall, the castings are sharp, and I guess they are pretty good for the 60s, but there is considerable flashing. Additionally, a few of the pieces are cast longer deliberately. It was expected that you would be able to file them down to the final length for a perfect fit, so there was a good bit of work to be done here with my file. To that point, my favorite way to clean parts is with my file. It's really too big for modeling, sort of like cutting a sandwich with a chainsaw. But I've become a bit of a samurai with this particular file. Maybe you'll see it again a couple of times in this video. It was from my dad's collection. I borrowed it from him about 20 years ago, and I just never gave it back because I loved it so much. And my dad's gone now since 2017, and this file reminds me of him. I'll talk about tools later in the video, but first, let's talk about regrets. This is paint, not primer. Mistakenly, I chose a color preference over purpose. I thought since it was enamel it would stick well enough. Regrets. Seriously, I am an idiot. Use primer first. I really need to get a good spray primer that's in a taupe color that I like. This paint was a good choice for painting these parts that are meant to look like wood. I applied an oiled earth wash by Viejo. This added a color layer and gets the pieces to the shade that I wanted, along with accenting the shadows and the details. Next, I'll try highlighting with Deck Tan, one of my favorites, and since I missed getting a good shot of these, I pulled footage from my Scotia build. At this point, they look very similar. Maybe I'll add a link here to that build. These wooden beams have metal parts such as the truss rod bolts, stirrups, queen posts. I'm painting those now with a basic rust color. These are starting to look pretty convincing. In fact, at one point, I broke out my scraps of stripwood, and when I put them away, I was missing my side sills. I had actually thrown them in the box with the scrap wood pieces. I'd say that's the look I'm going for. One of the fun challenges in this car was that the wheels provided were scaled 26 inches instead of the typical 33. I guessed that this would have a negative effect on the coupler height. I calculated it would lower the coupler about a 1/16 of an inch, and I did a quick mock-up and confirmed it. Some complex solutions crossed my mind, but a simple Katie solution won the day. Underset long shank number 21. One thing I didn't like about this kit was the stringers and the floorboards. The floorboard detail was simply stenciled onto the surface of the base, and there was no scribing to give it any floorboard texture. The stringers were cut into the bottom side and had been chipped over time. I typically prefer wood, but this just didn't pass. I decided to build the frame and decking from scratch. 0.73 inches in HO scale is 6.5 inches at scale-ish. After rounding, I determined that I needed 4 scale 6x6s for the stringers and 2 scale 6x10s for the center beams. These 6x12s were a little bit too big. I cut the stringers to length and began a rudimentary mock-up. I knew the best way to attach the bolsters and pedestals would be with epoxy, but I didn't think I could get everything lined up very well. And then I had a brilliant idea. I ran to my trusted CAD program, Excel. Then I changed the scale to inches, and I created this template in a 1:1 scale just by using the cell borders. It took about 10 minutes. I printed this, and I thought it would be good to use for alignment and guidance, but then I had a second brilliant idea. I realized that I could just glue the stringers directly to the paper. Then it would hold them in place while I glued the bolsters and the pedestal beams. Of course, I'm sure you're as frustrated as I am with the focus and framing of my shot here. It was the best I could do in the midst of all this brilliance. I glued my pieces directly to the template, then I added weight so that they would dry flat. I see it mentioned pretty often where guys are concerned about the project warping after gluing. It's a potential problem, but I've always had good luck preventing it by simply adding weight while the glue is curing. Use a flat surface and sandwich your piece under something else flat and heavy, like a Master's Creations kit that you saw a minute ago. This combination generally makes sure that the unit dries flat and stays flat because once set, the glue actually helps hold it flat. I love this technique. Back to my build. My template is working great. I've cut the assembly to length now and I'm ready to glue on my metal. First, I have to add the bolsters and the queen post pedestal beams. I did this with 5-minute epoxy. However, the 5-minute epoxy I had was a little bit expired and didn't set in 5 minutes. In fact, it took more like 5 hours. I had to go buy new epoxy, but this worked okay since these pieces set up while I went to the store. But I'm really proud of how this template worked. It did a great job of making things perfectly placed and helped me get it perfectly square as well. The one concern with this technique was how to get the paper off of the model. Frankly, it wasn't even necessary to remove it, but with a little scraping and sanding, I was able to get it off easily, so it worked out great. The next step was to epoxy the side sills and the end sills, and I accidentally did this off camera, so here's the final shot of the frame assembly. I'm staining the undercarriage and floorboards here, and there's nothing real special about it, which gives me a little time to wax nostalgic about our tools. Think about your tools. Which ones have an interesting story? Which ones have been with you for a long time? Which ones did you acquire from someone important? You spend more time with your tools than any specific kit. There are a few tools that you build a bond with. Some are not so important, but a few are. Be aware of that difference as you look in your toolbox. This is kind of an old man's hobby now, and maybe more on that another time. But as our friends in the hobby continue to move on to the great roundhouse in the sky, don't be the one aggressively seeking their old craftsman kits. Go for their most used tools. I think I'd love to have Da Vinci's paintbrush as much as I'd love to have the Mona Lisa. There's memory in the tools. In fact, I think I'm going to start a tool tradition. I might talk to a few of my modeling friends and see which ones of their tools they cherish most. I'll make sure that they know that is the tool that I want to remember them by. Anyway, my flat car needs a deck. You might have noticed that I stained 7 boards, which should be a bit more than enough. I cut them to length at 1.25 inches. They didn't have to be exactly perfect, as I want them to be a little rough anyway. 1 scale bonfire ready for action. I remembered from previous builds that I should drill the pilot hole and tap my holes for mounting the trucks. I did this here with my trusty number 5 tap, and number 56 happens to be my favorite hockey player, Sergei Zubov. The legal department now insists on a disclaimer here. I'm showing the result before the method so that you understand why I did this. I needed to create glue blocks for the truss rods and wanted them to have a groove where the wire would nestle into it. It seemed like a good idea to use the miter blade on these little blocks. It's far less dangerous than it looks, but please don't give it a try. I just used super glue to place the blocks. I cut the wire into the proper lengths. The wire was 0.20. It came with the kit. I'm bending it in the appropriate places and then gluing it into place, leaving it a little long so that theoretically I could pull them back taut if they were mishandled later. Remember this kindling? If you've never done board-on-board construction, this is the way to start. It's super easy, it has a great look, and it's quick. This combination of things is the way to build confidence in something that you've never done before. It's instant gratification at its finest. The whole process is simple. The staining was simple, the cutting was simple, the gluing was simple. Even though none of this came in the kit, it was reasonable to endure the unnecessary difficulty of scratch building the frame in order to have this result on the deck. Most of this decking was placed with regular white glue. It's good for wood-on-wood joints. You might have noticed though that I used super glue, CA glue if you prefer, to secure the end pieces. They were a wood to metal joint. Anyway, it's pretty clear why it's desirable to have an actual board-on-board construction. Mounting the couplers wasn't too difficult, but did require some work. The red ball end sills were cast with a coupler bracket. This kept the coupling box from being mounted to the end of the car. Solved this though through the long style shank, which added about a 1/16 of an inch to the coupler length. The casting did have to be filed out on the inner edges, but with this minor modification I was able to use the standard mounting boxes supplied by Katie. I sanded off the alignment tab, glued them in place with super glue, dropped the spring onto the pivot post, wedged the coupler through the end sill, and then glued the coupler box on. After mounting the trucks, you can see the coupler is perfect. Another thing you might notice in that final shot of the coupler is the freshly cut ends of the deck boards need a correction. It's simple enough to apply more India ink. You don't even need to be very careful. It may look like I'm being cautious here, but trust me, I'm being pretty careless. And while in hand, I took the time to give the deck another surface wash too. My flat cars only have a couple of decals. You've likely done this yourself numerous times. I often use this time to shill for the custom decal site where I ordered these. Fusion Scale Graphics at fsdecals.com. Most places assess a hefty artwork charge, even if the graphics are ready to go. With these guys though, since I was able to produce a high-resolution JPEG, 3 days later, my decals arrived with no questions and no upcharges. My fictitious Santa Clara River Valley branch line work train exists because of them. And with that, my flat car is ready to go. I guess you'd call this a progress shot. Some like it shaky, so this is for them. And now, what we've all been waiting for, the assembly of the Derrick Crane. The first step was to complete the final mock-up of the assembly. The instructions weren't too clear on this part. Actually, I'd say the instructions weren't that much help at all. The instructions mentioned 2 small screws, which I did find. They were to be inserted into the base to secure the boom arm. I didn't think this would look too great, so I went for a less desirable solution and used some 1/16 steel rod, which was extremely hard to cut and file. I also used some 3/64 rod for the crank and the chain roller. I learned my lesson from earlier and actually used primer on these pieces. An added perk is that I love this color. It provides a really nice base coat for rusted pieces. This is the rod that I used for the pivot point at the base of the boom arm. To get started on the color, I mixed up a wash of dark rust using this Panzer Aces shade and a little bit of water. Then I brushed it on all of the rusty pieces. I'm really trying to get it into the deep crevices and highlight the shadows on these. One of the goals here is to add as many layers of color as possible. I typically start with the darker shades and wetter techniques, then finish with lighter shades and dry brushing. I also took the opportunity to break out one of my all-time favorite metal colors from my 40-year-old Tamiya collection, gunmetal. You can see now that the details are a lot more visible. Next we'll move on to the wooden pieces where there are rusty parts on them. I'm using a small brush to paint those fine details with a light rust color. I continued to add more and more layers of color until satisfied. This doesn't change the overall shade that I perceive, but it helps highlight the details and gives the piece texture. Lastly, I caught a pretty funny moment on camera and thought you would enjoy my improved editing skills and how I coordinated the event with the music. The most gratifying part, final assembly. I did not follow the instructions here either. I started by gluing the pivot plate to the pillar. I pretty much used super glue from here on out, by the way. I decided to make my model even more delicate by allowing some of the parts to be movable or positionable, like the pillar on the deck plate, not glued in. The masthead is affixed to the top of the pillar, or mast. It needed to be square with the pivot plate below, so I pressed it firmly against the tabletop to square it up. Assembly of the Derrick boom is next. This specific type of crane, invented by Thomas Derrick in the early 1600s. He was actually a British sailor who became an executioner to avoid punishment for his own crimes. He then decided to make a career of it. In order to become a more efficient executioner, he developed a type of gallows that consisted of an upright post and a boom from which the noose at the head could be controlled by a system of pulleys. This became known as a derrick, and to this day, cranes in this configuration are called Derrick Cranes. The assembled boom consists of two beams with bearings on top and bottom, the chain roller at the boom head, the drum for the winch, the two reduction gears, the crank, and the crankshaft. The span is supported by two stay cables, which are 021 gauge wire. The span is directed to be 2 1/8 inches long or 15 scale feet. I bent the wires and cut them to length, and they look pretty good. I went ahead and glued the base of the boom, and at this point, the whole assembly is pretty stable. Next, I needed to clean up the details that I rubbed off through handling, so I brushed it up with a little bit of lighter rust paint. Again, the more layers, the better. One final fiddly bit was to attach the chain to the hook, which required the creation of a makeshift link. Kinda difficult. But I wrapped the chain one rotation around the drum and glued it in place, and that was it. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness this matrimony between two partners who will forever be together for the rest of their lives. In this final step, I used my new 2.0 epoxy to place the crane onto the flat car. It was suggested to position it over one of the trucks, but I did it just ahead of the truck for better balance. I have a number of crane cars. I have a Yield Huff and Puff car from the 70s. I have a Tichy styrene kit. I have another Red Ball kit that's a 120-ton crane. I have a Japanese kit that's made of all photo-etched brass. It will be beautiful, but I was always interested in this one, and it's just the right size for my little backwoods work train. I'm really glad I made it for you. I don't know what load to put on this car yet, but here's a mock-up with a Keystone Locomotive Works donkey engine and a couple of Prizer workers. This would look terrific. That's it for this build. I'm thinking of doing a Taurus stock car next, or maybe an Android dormitory car, or perhaps a Rio Grande side dump gondola. Let me know your thoughts. I appreciate you watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, then support my channel. Hit the like button, the subscribe button, the bell button, whatever works for you, and we'll see you soon.